Welcome to the podcast. College recruiting. It's a super valuable topic. It's an interesting topic. It's a topic that I don't think is covered enough. And I think parents need to be educated. But in all fairness, it's very difficult to educate yourself on this because you learn as you go through it. So if you didn't play college basketball, if you haven't already had a son or a daughter that played college basketball, it's like jumping off a train in the middle of the night. You have no idea where you're going to land. And it's challenging, it's hard, it's confusing. There's a lot of websites, there's a lot of YouTube videos. The goal for this is kind of just to give an overall comprehensive view on what it is, what it means, how it works, just to help parents. The goal for this is to help parents understand how the college recruiting process works now because it's changed a lot. It's not like it was 5 years ago. It's not like it was 10 years ago. It's definitely not like it was 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, the whole college landscape has changed. And the reality is that every kid, and it's funny, it's sad, but it is what it is. Every single kid wants to play at the highest possible level. If you ask a kid in any gym, where do you want to play? They're going to say Duke, Kentucky, depending on where they live in the country. They might say Michigan, UCLA, but they're going to say the biggest names, right? They want to play at the highest possible level. And that's hard because those schools want the best of the best, and those schools are looking for future NBA lottery draft pick caliber talent. So it's hard. It's hard to play at that level. So what happens is kids are used to watching games on TV and they see those teams. They see Duke, Kentucky, and all those other teams. So that's who they associate with being at the highest level, and that's where they want to play. That's cool. That's what they should want to do, right? To challenge themselves to be at the highest possible level. The reality of it is that just the sheer math of it, 0.00001% of players are going to play at those schools, right? So, okay, there's other D1 schools, but there's also other D2 schools that can make a lot of sense. And then the part that's crazy about this is that D3, a lot of kids have never even been to a D1 game, first of all, but D3 is a really high level. And there's some really good basketball at the D3 level, like really good basketball. Like most high school kids would be blown away at how good, how competitive, how talented some of those teams really are. And I would suggest that if you're the father or mother of a son or daughter that wants to play college basketball, there's a bunch of steps that have to be tackled along this way. First and foremost, they got to be good enough, right? Okay, how do you get good enough? You got to work, you got to train, you got to practice, you got to compete, you got to travel, you got all that stuff that goes into that. And we'll get into a bunch of that stuff throughout the course of several of these episodes and through the course of this podcast with the educational portion of that. But sticking to college recruiting, first and foremost, the player has to be good enough. So they got to be really, really talented. How do you know how talented you have to be if you've never seen a college player play in person, in action? So depending on where you live in the country, here in Pittsburgh, I don't know why, but there's a plethora of colleges in this area. So you got 3 D1 schools, a bunch of D2 schools within driving distance, like very close, all kinds of D3 schools in the area. Some of them high academic, other ones that maybe have some liberal arts and some programs and some majors that would make a lot of sense for kids to graduate in and to get a really good job afterward. But most of these kids, and again, I'm speaking to you on a personal, individual level as parents, make sure that your son or daughter, make sure they go to actually see a game. Like they need to see what it's like. They need to see those players in person, in action, to see how hard they cut, to see how hard they defend, to see how talented they are, to see how good they shoot. They need to see that. And the D3 levels are very, very high level. So I don't want to get off on a side note or a rant about how highly I think of the D3 level, but it's a very good level. It's an academic level. It's a place where kids should be a little bit more realistic and not look down upon it because most kids aren't going to play at Duke or Kentucky. Let's just get that part out of the way right now. And I hope your son or daughter busts their butt and works really hard and is lucky enough and has the genetic makeup to play at Duke or Kentucky. But the reality is that most kids won't. So you need to be very open-minded and consider all of the available options. So if nobody ever really says, I want to play D2 or D3, nobody really says it until they have to say that, right? You have to understand that back in the day, and I hate to say this as if I'm 100 years old, but back in the day, colleges full of a staff and those assistant coaches were assigned to different parts of the country and they had their contacts, they had their connections, they were friends with certain high school programs that produced talent consistently, and they used those relationships to build relationships with kids. They would invest time into building those relationships relatively early with kids that somehow fit the profile of what they were looking for. Over time, social media has kind of changed everything. So now those assistant coaches in college, they have access to way more video, way more exposure events, way more lists of talented players from these events. And there's scouts that travel around and rank players. So all of that information is out there. For sure, there's some fluff along the way, but there's more information available. So they kind of know earlier who they want already. So it's rare for a kid to just kind of burst on the scene out of nowhere. It does happen. But again, kids develop at different paces and different stages. So I'm not necessarily a big fan of ranking fifth graders and third graders and seventh graders. And it's like, I hear this sometimes at the Scoring Factory, and parents reach out and they want us to train their kids, or they want to get involved in our program. They want to play in the academy, all the above. And they tell me something like, my fifth grader is the best fifth grader in fill in the blank region, right? And I try to be nice, I try to be respectful, but I'm also very honest and say, listen, that's great, but there's a bunch of kids and they're all going to develop very differently. The main thing is for your kid to love the game, to work really hard. If they do that, then good things will happen. So the most important thing is to understand that players can come from anywhere and everywhere. So it's not just American kids anymore, right? Players can come from anywhere and everywhere. So it's hard. It's hard to catch their attention when they're already busy traveling the country with their own games and game planning. So these college coaches, they don't have a ton of time to travel around, and they're definitely not going to high school games as much as they used to because of AAU and all of the other high level competition that's out there where they can see more than just one player at a time. So social media has changed everything. It's provided more information for them, and that can be used as a tool for your son or daughter to promote themselves, to showcase what they do, to have some videos available. I think sometimes kids forget that coaches might see that and see, I don't know, some music with some swear words or some inappropriate memes or something like that, and kind of make an early judgment call and kind of back off of a kid. But that's an entirely different topic and conversation that we'll get into at some future point. The main thing is that social media has kind of changed the landscape. What's really changed everything, and COVID played a role in this with the extra year that many college players receive. So they call that the COVID year. And that's going to go away this next year finally. But the transfer portal. So a long time ago when I played college basketball, if you wanted to transfer, you had to sit out a year. So if I played at my school, my college, and I wanted to go to a different school, I could go there, but I would have to just practice. I'd have to redshirt. I could only practice. I won't be able to play in any games. I didn't lose a year, but I couldn't play that year. So then I would play the next year, right? So a lot of kids are, you have to think, do I really want to make that sacrifice and do that? At some point in time, the NCAA, and we can do a whole podcast just about the NCAA and how much that's changed in the past couple of years with the Ed O'Bannon case and all that kind of stuff. But so the NCAA has opened it up and allowed players to transfer. And at one point in time, it was just grad transfers. So if you graduate from university, you can go somewhere else and play immediately. And then they had to open it up where something happened to your family or there's some type of hardship that you can transfer and play immediately. Then everybody was allowed one. And now there's talk about potentially players can just transfer whenever they want and they don't have to sit out ever, right? So theoretically, there's going to be players in the future that they go to college A for their freshman year, college B for their sophomore year, college C for their junior year, and college D for their senior year, all along the way, treating it borderline like pro basketball. I don't even know how that works academically, and I don't know if all the credits transfer. I don't, who knows? Like, there's so many points that need to be addressed and fixed to make sure that kids actually get their degree at the end of all that, that they're actually getting education if that's important to them. But the transfer portal changed everything. So now, before we get deeper in talking about the NIL, the transfer portal means that college assistant coaches, and keep in mind that college, like high level, so not just Duke and Kentucky, but all the other schools that play on TV at some point in time, they're there because these head coaches, they're there because they're paid to be there. I'm sure they're nice guys, but they're there because they're paid to be there. And if the coach at the worst possible D1 school got an offer for more money to go play in a better conference with a better arena, with a higher recruiting budget so he can get better players, he would do that in a heartbeat. So coaches have been transferring, and it's not called that, they just accept a better job, but coaches have been transferring since the dawn of time. But now, with the transfer portal, these coaches have figured out, they send out their assistant coaches and they're scouring lists that come out. They're no longer heavily recruiting high school players unless they're the next Cooper Flag or the next NBA lottery pick. They're looking for college players now. So why would they look for a high school player who's 17, 18, that's still developing, that's still a little bit skinny, that's still a little bit raw, that's still very inexperienced? Why would they recruit him? Why would they want him when they can go get a 21-year-old man that has already played D1, that has already been around the block, that has already gained very valuable experience in the NCAA tournament or in a very tough conference, banging, elbowing, working, fighting his way through practices, and knows the daily grind of that? Why would anybody who's potentially going to get fired if they don't win games. Why would they recruit a high school kid when they can get a college kid that's already kind of a molded product rather than an unknown project, right? So the transfer portal has changed a lot, and it's important for parents. I'm trying to help share wisdom about what the landscape actually looks like. So why would a college coach go get a kid or chase a kid when he can get a grown man, right? So that's changed everything. So the transfer portal is an evolving situation that if you look back over the last several years, every single year that goes by, there's been more transfers than the year before. So it seems like every spring is a brand new record that's reported on ESPN and all the news outlets, the most players ever enter the transfer portal, right? So who knows if and when that will ever change, as long as players are allowed to transfer whenever they want without having to sit out. The NIL, some people think that that applies to everybody. Like, companies are going to pay money into these collectives, and this is still an evolving landscape, but companies are going to pay money into these collectives, or donors, or sponsors, or boosters. They're going to pay into this collective to help their favorite school win. But they're still kind of going through this Wild West phase of this where I don't know why a donor would give 100,000 or 200,000 or $1 million to a collective that would then give it to the school if they don't have a say so in which players are going to recruit, which players are going to sign. So all of this is a very quickly evolving landscape that's very different from one state to another and one school to another. So it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. But the NIL basically is that players are now allowed to receive money. They're allowed to advertise their name. They're allowed to advertise their image. They're allowed to use their likeness to generate income while they're a quote unquote student athlete. The student athlete term, you might be able to throw that away soon at a certain level for the Power Five conferences, but they're still called student athletes right now. At some point in time, they're going to have to come in with some type of unionized labor and contracts. That's not there yet, but that's coming. So right now, the NIL is what attracts kids to the highest level. The reason why a player would go to Duke or Kentucky or Arkansas or UConn or any of these schools sometimes sadly doesn't come down to what major is available at that school. It comes down to who's offering the most money. And it used to be that when you go on a college recruiting visit, you check out the arena, they'd show you the locker room, you go meet a professor or two, they give you a tour of the school. A lot of times now, players don't even go on the visits. They just want to know how much can you offer. And then they're just comparing the numbers. And it's become very much a transaction, and there's a lot less loyalty, obviously. So there's a lot going on with the highest level of D1 right now with money and NIL and all that. And I'm not here to argue the pros and cons of that. I'm just, again, trying to help educate. So the moms and dads out there that may have a kid that's going to play college basketball at some point in time in the future kind of understand at least a little bit how things work. It was very interesting earlier this year in the NCAA. There was a starting quarterback for UNLV, and the team was 3-0. He decided he's not going to play anymore. He's not going to play the rest of the season. I mean, like, these are things that just are unfathomable even 5 years ago, right? Like, things like that didn't happen. But anyways, they're 3-0. He's doing great, good enough to lead this team to 3-0, right? And then it comes out that he said he's not going to play anymore. And then now there's all kinds of backlash, and like the schools trying to protect themselves and they're saying what they got to say. So I don't want to get too deep into the facts because I don't know all the facts. I only know what you read on ESPN and other sites. But apparently he didn't receive whatever was promised to him from a monetary standpoint. So things like that are going to happen more often until they kind of figure out having contracts for these players and realizing that, okay, if you're generating revenue and income and there's tailgating going on and you're selling hot dogs and you have to pay to sit in the stands and you're selling t-shirts and jerseys, if those players are there generating revenue for the university, at some point in time, maybe they're not technically a student athlete anymore. Maybe they are an employee. That's something that they got to figure out. We'll see how that develops. How can you help your son or daughter be seen? How can you make sure that they're seen by colleges? And again, I don't want to focus too much on D1. I don't want to focus too much on D3. Let's just say college basketball. How do you make sure that they're seen by coaches? AAU is kind of what has risen to the occasion over the last, let's say, 20 years in terms of allowing players a place to showcase their skills, to play in front of a multitude of college coaches at once. It used to be that you didn't have to play AAU and you can play high school basketball and you'd be seen by somebody and be recruited. Again, why would a college assistant coach go watch one high school game to see maybe one player if you can see several at an AAU tournament? So from an efficiency standpoint, where are their recruiting dollars best spent in terms of travel and hotels and all that stuff, losing time? They're going to go to AU tournaments. So high school, it's awesome. It's an amazing environment. There's fans, there's student sections. It's beautiful. But it's not going to be the end all be all in terms of helping players be seen by college coaches. You can clip those videos. You can have somebody help you create a highlight tape and use your high school games, but you're actually going to be seen in person for the most part at an AU tournament. And there's some really bad AU tournaments out there too, and there's some really good ones, right? So I don't want to just have a blanket statement and say that AAU is great. There's some bad parts of AAU, and AAU can be very watered down. And if you're not on a top team, and if you're not in a tournament that's actually playing with college coaches there, or if you're playing at the wrong tournaments at the wrong point in time of the year, and you're not playing during the live period, then there's going to be nobody there watching you either. So there's several live periods through the course of the summer in AAU season. There's several live periods, and a live period means that college coaches can actually be in attendance watching your son or daughter perform. If it's not a live period, there's not going to be D1 coaches there. So if high school is not the place to be seen, what school could you go to? You could play at a powerhouse like IMG, and there's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of very, very good prep schools. So you could play at a prep school, and at that prep school, if your son or daughter is talented enough, they're going to be with several other players just like them from a talent perspective, from a potential perspective. So they're going to be surrounded by talent, which means those practices will probably be pretty good, very competitive. They're going to be challenged every single day, which is good. And then they're going to play a competitive schedule, most likely national, where there's travel involved, and they're traveling the country and going around and playing other prep schools. So if you're doing that, there will be more college attention on those schools. But those schools, that's not a typical high school program. So if you go to a normal high school, just know that you have to do everything you can to maximize your performance. And I'm not saying to be selfish, but you have to maximize your performance and do everything you can to help your team win. Then you have to do the best you can to document that, meaning get copies of your game footage, create highlight tapes, try to be seen, try to get on a really good AU team that travels. So there's a step-by-step list of what you should do for that, right? Now, this is the thing that is so simple. It's honestly, it's free, and most kids just don't do it. So what you should do at some point in time when your son or daughter's getting into high school and they're starting to play varsity basketball, they're just about to get going, and kind of all these years of hard work, all the fun, all those youth games, all the stuff they've done leading up to this point. So they're playing varsity basketball. They're starting to have fun games and experiences, and they're producing and doing good things. It's free, and kids don't do this enough. I don't want to say they're a little bit lazy. Let's just say that they don't know. Let's say it's ignorance for the most part right now. They don't know that you should. So you as a parent can help them with this. They should be writing emails to schools where they would like to play. Those email addresses, they're hard to find sometimes, but they're basically on every single school's website. So they should be writing those schools. And again, now that I say this, everybody's going to try to, all these kids are going to try to hunt down email addresses for Duke and Kentucky and all the highest Power 5 programs. They should be thinking about schools where they might actually fit, right? We'll talk about that in a second, but writing schools where they might actually fit, where they introduce themselves, they express interest in the program, they include their GPA, their height, their weight, their position, link to some highlights, offer to send them a link with some full games, basically introducing themselves. And then from there, it's like knocking on doors trying to sell candy bars or something like that. Not every door is going to open. And from the doors that do open, not everybody's going to say, yes, we'd like to buy a candy bar, right? So you send out, let's say 50 emails. You might get 10 responses. From those 10 responses, maybe 2 express interest and want to know more. Great. So it was worthwhile. But it takes time. It takes a little bit of diligence. It takes a little bit of elbow grease, but it's free. So I would highly encourage that you have your son or daughter do that if and when they get to that stage. The next way to be seen is elite camps. So the NCAA has kind of removed June, the month of June. They've removed that from the AAU schedule in terms of recruiting. So June is basically, they're trying to put a little bit more power back in the high school program's hands. So June is when you can only play with your high school, but you have to play in this live period, and they're not everywhere. They're not in everybody's backyard. So you might have to travel to the nearest metropolis, the nearest big city, and then your high school program will play against a bunch of other really good high school programs. But if your high school program is not very good and there's not 2 or 3 kids that might potentially play in college, You might go to one of these live period events and lose every game by 30. So you really have to kind of figure out, when does it make sense? Your high school coach has to figure out, when does it make sense to travel to these and go to these? Because it doesn't make sense to go there every year unless you have the talent that can kind of back that up. But just so you understand the summer months, you should, if your son or daughter is good enough to play in college, you should probably kind of nudge and ask your high school coach, the high school varsity coach, what live periods they plan on playing in during June. It's very hard for a lot of people, but for young players, it's very hard to look in the mirror. So I would like to challenge them, and I'm asking you to help them do this, right? Because this podcast is kind of geared towards helping parents gain education while being able to better serve and support their son or daughter. So to look in the mirror, you kind of have to figure out, what do D1 players look like? And that's why I suggested early on, go to games, watch games in person. Don't just be a fan. Try to study a little bit, try to see something, try to gain a little bit of wisdom, try to pick some things out, but go to games and see what those D1 players look like. And as you look in the mirror, so as your son or daughter looks in the mirror, do they look like that? So if your son or daughter is extremely short, not very fast, doesn't have a really good shot, is not able to dribble with their weaker hand, is kind of confused about certain basketball concepts, kind of forgets the plays all the time, and barely plays on the team because the coach doesn't like players that forget the plays all the time. So if you fit into that box, what I just described, and then you go watch your local D1 team play and you see a bunch of kids crazy fast, super athletic. There's some guys that are 6'7", there's some guys that are 6'9", there's some guards that are like 6'1". They all have strengths and some type of super skill. Like, some of them are really good at shooting, some of them are really good at attacking, some of them are great defenders, some of them are great at rebounding. There's like 2 or 3 guys that will lock up defenders. There's a couple guys that are crazy tough and take charges and dive on the floor and do everything the coach asks for. Do you look like that? Do you fit into that? And if not, maybe we should make sure that your son or daughter is not just going to D1 games and hoping to play at that level, but we should look at some D2 games. We should go try to see some D3 schools and see if they can play at that level. Once you kind of go through that and you look in the mirror, kind of figure out, like, who are some players that they're similar to. So as you look at your son or daughter and you see, all right, they're good at this, they look like this, they're shaped like that, they run like this, they jump like this. Who are they similar to at the D1, D2, or D3 level? And then that will kind of help you figure out where they might be. So if we're talking about kids in 5th and 6th grade, kids that are in 3rd or 4th grade, kids that are in 7th or 8th grade, it's very, very difficult to kind of project how they'll develop. You might have played high school or college basketball as a parent. You might not have. And even that doesn't determine how good or bad they're going to be as athletes, because there's always a little bit of luck involved. And then it comes down to how they're wired. Are they hungry? Are they aggressive? Are they hardworking? Do they go on the driveway on their own and work really hard and work on shooting and work on ball handling? Are they competitive? How bad do they want it? So it's hard to say at a very, very young age. Once you get to high school, you start to figure it out a little bit. So to help them with that, try to take them to some games. Try to pull up a game if the nearest colleges are too far away. Try to pull up a game and watch a game in its entirety. I'm not talking about highlights on TikTok or Instagram or something like that. A game in its entirety, and try to really, like, pick out a couple players that they're similar to. Study them, see how hard they run, see how they set screens, see how they use screens, see how they move off ball, see what type of defense they play, and see who they're similar to. And by doing that, I think you'll find out where they might be able to fit at some point in time in the future. I want to challenge, and this is, sometimes we have players that want to try out for our AU team that travels the country and plays in front of college coaches. We have players that try out and come to these tryouts, and they're not even that good on their high school team. I can respect the hustle, I can respect the confidence, I can respect the positive outlook and the optimism, but they're not even that good on their high school team, and they want to play in a very, very competitive AU program. So again, I respect and I applaud the optimism, but you have to think about, if you don't stand out with your strengths in your own high school, how do you expect those to be your strengths in college when everybody's faster, everybody's bigger, everybody's stronger, everybody's more aggressive, right? So you need to figure out what your strengths are, and you can help your son or daughter with this, but figure out, what are their strengths? Are they really good at shooting? Are they really good at running pick and roll? Are they a really good defender? Do they have great post footwork? Figure out what are their strengths, and then figure out, can they have that strength be their strength in college, or they're going to have to adapt and add something else. All of that comes down to, though, do they work hard enough? Colleges want to win. College coaches want to make sure that they find players that help them win so they don't get fired. So, does your son or daughter work hard enough? And I'm going to be honest, I'm a father of 4 kids that other people tell me all the time, oh man, they're good, they're talented, they work hard, they're really smart. And sometimes I'm very hard on my kids, and that's something I think we all have to work on. But in my mind, I don't know where that threshold is, where that benchmark is of where you would say, oh, yes, my son or daughter works hard enough. I don't know where that number is. Is that a statement of, yeah, they work 10 hours a day, that's enough? Is it 9 hours a day? That's enough. Is it 3? Is it 2? I don't know how to quantify what working hard enough is, but they definitely need to show a passion for the game and a willingness to learn and to fight for what they want. As a parent, you can't want it for them. I mean, you can, but it's not going to do anything for them. You can't want it for them. They have to want it. They have to work hard enough. So through the course of these podcasts, I hope that parents are educated enough to help their kids make some really difficult decisions and have some reality checks and figure out, okay, buddy, you're probably not going to play at Duke or Kentucky, but you are good. You had a great year. Here's the next steps to help us figure out where you belong. And again, before I get into the next couple parts of this, any moms or dads out there that have any questions about anything I've said thus far, feel free to ask. Leave it in the comments below. Ask, don't be embarrassed. I feel bad that there isn't a way for parents to get all the information that they need. And the hard part about all this is there's a lot of high school coaches that don't really even know how it works anymore. So if you're hoping and waiting for your high school coach, who's probably a busy guy or lady, you're waiting for them to do everything for your son or daughter. They might have their own family at home and they might have other responsibilities where they haven't been able to keep up with the changing landscape. So again, if you have a question about how any of this works, comment, let us know, and we'll answer it. And that way, other people can comment and chime in too with their experiences. Because the people that know the most are the parents that have recently gone through this. It's not the parents that went through this 20 years ago because the landscape has changed so much. All right, so players should control what they could control, and parents should too, right? But as humans, we should control what we can control. Should we spend a lot of time focused on trying to change the transfer portal? No, that's what can we do about that? You're gonna go out and get a petition to get that's not what are you gonna do, right? So control what you could control. What can players control? We talked about who they can send emails to, who they can contact, what schools. We talked about how they can do that. What else can they control? They can control their attitude. They can control their work ethic. They can control their body language. They can control playing unselfish and not just looking like the type of player that shoots it every single time, that's chasing stats. They can look like the type of player that would fit in well in a college. The vast majority of players that get recruited that come out of high school that are lucky enough, and I want to stress, lucky enough to play college basketball, they're not going to step on a campus and be the best player there. So it's going to be very important that they come in with the right attitude, that they're willing to work, that they're willing to do some of the dirty work and hustle and dive on the floor and all that kind of good stuff. But they're going to have to be there early to practice and stay late and really earn their way because those coaches, and I keep coming back to this, they're going to play whoever they need to win games. So make sure that they're controlling what they can control. And as a parent, as a mom and a dad, just know that if your son or daughter leads your school in scoring, in the scheme of things, that doesn't really mean anything. They'd be better off playing a high level of basketball that college coaches can look at and recognize and see this can fit in with how we play. So they don't necessarily need to lead the team in scoring. They don't need to chuck it up every single time they get it. So as a mom or dad, please don't be the parents that are out there saying, shoot it, shoot it, and screaming at your kid to do that. One, that's irritating for the high school coach. You're going against everything that the team needs in terms of playing as a team, as a unit, as a group of kids. And college coaches, it's going to turn them off. They don't want to see that anyway. So again, scoring is not the end all be all. They need to play team basketball. All right. Next thing, control what you can control. Don't wait around. Be proactive. So we talked about trying to get on a good AU team. We talked about working out hard in the driveway. We talked about getting up extra reps. We talked about sending emails. Don't wait around. Be proactive. As a side note, D3 schools, and we know, I mean, we interact with coaches at all levels that recruit our kids. And we've trained a lot of very, very talented players over the years that have played at all kinds of schools across the country at every level. So D3 coaches have told me that they don't even recruit kids until their senior year, for sure after their junior, but they don't even recruit until their senior year. Do you know why? If you had to guess, like think about that right now. If you're in your car or whatever, people are looking over and you're kind of talking to yourself. I'm not asking you to talk to yourself, but really think about why would a D3 coach wait to recruit a high school kid until their senior year? Why wouldn't he invest time sooner and develop a relationship and kind of get to know him and kind of see his progress and track his progress over the years? Why do you think that is? All right, I'll tell you now. Because before that, every single kid thinks that they're going to play D1. It sounds funny, but that's just the reality. There's very, very few kids that, as a freshman or a sophomore, that are wise enough, that are realistic enough to realize they're probably going to be a D3 player and they're already thinking in that realm. So that's the reason. So if you get to your senior year and Duke and Kentucky aren't banging down your door, make sure that D3 schools in your area know who you are, and then they might start recruiting you. But again, you got to be talented. You got to be good. D3 is not for everybody. It's not like, all right, if I don't get to play Duke, Kentucky, I'll just go play D3. No, it's hard. Not everybody even gets to play D3 basketball. It's hard. Again, go watch a game. Go see how good those kids are. So we talked about how D1 schools barely even recruit high school players anymore because of the transfer portal. But even now, I want you to understand that at the D3, at the D2, at the D1 level, there's so many more Europeans coming over. Schools, they want talent. They want players that can help them win games. So they want talented kids there. They want tall kids. They want fast kids. They want strong kids. They want skilled kids. The whole spectrum. They want whoever they can get that will help them win games. So there's a lot of Europeans that are coming over. There's Africans. There's kids from all over the world that want to play in college, that want to get a degree, that want to figure out how they can get some of that NIL money too, if possible. So you're not just competing against kids in your section, in your area, in your school. You're competing against the whole world to try to get one of those college spots. So it's very challenging. It's very hard. It's very difficult because times have changed. So parents and players have to adapt. Over the next few years, there's going to be a lot more changes in this landscape with the transfer portal, NIL. It's going to be interesting to see how that develops. But if your son or daughter wants to play in college, they have to learn to appreciate when they're wanted. So if and when a D2 school recruits them, you shouldn't brush them off and think I'm too good for that. If and when a D3 school comes knocking, you shouldn't brush them off and say I'm too good for that. We haven't talked about some other options. If we're going to say that high school is point A and playing at a four-year university is point B, it's not always a straight line. There's other ways to get from point A to point B. One, if your son or daughter's a little bit inexperienced, if they need to gain a little bit of weight, if they need a little bit more skill work, if they need to learn the position better, whatever the case may be, if 1 year would do them a lot of good, then there's something called prep school that they should consider, which is basically a 13th year of school, right? So it's like an extra year of high school where you're already working on some college courses, where you can improve your SAT score and ACT score. The prep school route could be a viable option for your son or daughter. But there's also JUCO. JUCO is junior colleges. So there's also the JUCO route where potentially their grades aren't good and they need to improve. So they can go to JUCO for 2 years and then be recruited from JUCO, which means that they're a couple years older, stronger, faster, more skilled, more experienced. So that can help them as well. I really hope that this helped you better understand the college recruiting landscape. Your son or daughter doesn't need to be the number one player in their fifth grade class. They don't need to be like all these things that kind of confuse parents and they get caught up thinking, okay, it's super important that we have to win the sixth grade championship in Ohio. We got to travel to Maryland. We got to go down to Texas. We got to go to Las Vegas, or we got to go to nationals down in Florida. Those things don't mean a whole lot in the realm of college recruiting. So at those younger stages, your kids should be developing a passion for the game and just develop their love for working hard so they get better, so they improve, so they can reach their potential. When should you start thinking about college recruiting? Once they're at the high school level. And some of you maybe have a kid that's 12 years old and he's 7'2" or something like that. That maybe is a little bit different. Maybe there's an asterisk on that where college coaches might start figuring out, who is this kid that's 7'2", that's 12 years old out there or whatever? Who's this kid that's 6'9", that's dunking from the free throw line and they tell me he's in sixth grade? That's different. There's a huge asterisk by that. So if your kid is the next Giannis or Victor Wembanyama or whatever, if your kid's that, then maybe some of this doesn't apply to you. But for everybody else, college recruiting is an important topic that should enter your lives around 10th grade year-ish. Maybe sooner, maybe later, but around 10th grade year is when you should start really thinking about it, and your son or daughter should start being proactive by looking in the mirror and figuring out where do they potentially belong, and then writing some emails and kind of just establishing connections with coaches to see if they're good enough. I hope this helped you. Please, if it did, like, share, comment, spread the word, and we'll keep putting out more information to help those that want it. Any questions? Let us know. Come get some.